Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is our closing plenary, Staying the Course on the SDG in a Time of Crisis. This is the penultimate session before the launch of the long-awaited Women's Forum G7 recommendation. So over the last 5 years, we've seen growing recognition of the value of the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework to drive action. Today, we talk about access to health, economic empowerment, climate action, the future of decent work, and the power of gender equality and partnership to drive all of these, which are all part of the SDG framework. We've only 1 decade left to achieve the SDGs and many crises on our hands, whether the pandemic or the climate emergency. Our next speakers will challenge businesses and government to stay the course and use the SDGs to build back better, not just faster. To lead that promising conversation, I'm delighted to introduce Sandrine Dixson-Declève. Sandrine, amongst many other things, is the first female co-president of the Club of Rome. She's got deep experience in sustainability, energy, and green growth across policy and business. Sandrine, it's a great pleasure to introduce you and to give you the virtual floor to introduce your speaker. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sophie. And it's such a pleasure to be able to open up this closing panel with such an incredible group of leaders. I want to maybe do the first thing, which is to bridge a little bit the gap between what you've been discussing today and some of the key messages that seem to be coming out on what you have communicated to me and what we've been hearing, which is that if we are looking at a systems approach, and in particular, if we're going to look at the integration of SDGs post-COVID, which is so fundamental, and the holistic approach that governments should be pledging to as we come out of COVID, I think it's really important to look at some of the key messages. What's come out from today is that health is fundamental. Health, both in terms of the way in which women are very much part of health infrastructure, the caring community within our economy, and that this needs to be noticed. But also the effect that it's had on the most vulnerable, women who actually, we have heard time and time again, have been in very uncomfortable situations, a growing abuse, and issues also of not being cared for during this very important time of COVID. So I think health in terms of women having access to good health, but also taking into consideration the importance of women's jobs in the health sector. The second is the gap that still exists with regard to businesses. And we'll hear a bit more of that from both Julie and Stefan in terms of the way in which women are really the ones who are being left behind, already were pre-COVID and are going to have a huge impact post-COVID. And then a few key questions that are really close to my heart, and I think Rachel and I will be able to really hone in on this. One, obviously, the climate question. As we're moving out of COVID, this is a crisis that was pre-COVID and continues to be a very important part of also the symptom that COVID is, which is the way in which we're encroaching on our planetary boundaries, and the need to innovate and have more women involved in STEM in order to create more jobs that are important to get us out, both of the COVID mess, but also the climate mess. And then the importance of AI. And I think a very important point that has come out, and I'm going to finish with that because I think that is the key conversation that we need to have, which is AI needs to be created for people. The conversation that's coming out of COVID is we're back to what's essential. What's essential for people is a value system that has very much shifted away from profits, back to health, back to what are the tools that we have in our toolbox to ensure that people's livelihoods are taken care of first, and that people actually can live well in the economy that we have. So I would like to open up with that question a little bit to Rachel, because what we've seen, Rachel, is obviously within this crisis, leaders who are showing a real human concern, both for the crisis itself and what it's doing to people's lives, but also communicating with people. And I think that we've seen, obviously, within that leadership call, many women stepping up to the plate. But also from your education perspective as the Dean of Fletcher, what is that doing also to the whole educational system right now? And how do we continue to promote the right education as we move forward post-COVID?
Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, everybody. Great set of questions. I'm going to whiz through a 64,000 foot sort of survey of that, and happy to get into details. We already knew before the crisis that that our education systems weren't really attuned to the need to be able to master the digital revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, as the World Economic Forum calls it. That we were perhaps over-educating in some areas and under-educating in others, and we have to think about what it means to be human beings in a world where we can have machines and we can use AI for much of what we've used to do. At the same time, of course, we have huge inequality in education, just access to the education that we need to be able to exploit digital technology for clean water, clean energy. These are the other parts of the problem. And that, of course, is all encompassed in the SDGs. So I think both the European Union and others have focused on the fact that you can train for certainty. And so there are hard skills that people need. You need to be able to construct wind turbines onshore and offshore for a clean, green economy. But you have to educate for uncertainty. And that means that at the end of the day, as a species, we have to be able to see around the corners and understand how these compound crises are going to continue to knock us off course unless we can build economies and societies which are inclusive, which are cleaner and greener. The Secretary General called for a recovery which is clean, green, safe and fair, and that's going to need humanity. You see it in leaders, the leaders who are building social trust, say what they don't know when they don't know it, say that we will work through this together. They embrace science and they're not frightened to put policy on the back of science. They lead with their heart and their head, and they understand that in their active leadership, they can build the trust that we're going to need to go into an uncertain world. The fact that most of those successful communicating leaders are women is something that I think we've talked a lot about today.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a very important point, both in terms of the fact that the new leadership seems to be those women who have really demonstrated post-COVID that, by also creating resilient economies, they've been able to come out stronger and already start to integrate SDGs in terms of their economic thinking. But you bring up a fantastic point around educating for uncertainty. And this is where I'd like to turn to you, Stefan, because clearly what we're saying, many of us, is you have to design for uncertainty. You can't just continuously react to disasters. This is going to be one of many crises. What is the role of business in ensuring that we do design for uncertainty? I know you've been working very closely with government leaders to ensure that as we move through COVID, we both learn, we don't make the same mistakes, and we start to design for future crises.
Well, thank you, Sandrine, and thanks for having me here on the panel. I think first, in a way, we're in business, we're used to crisis, okay? So crisis is the up and down of the life that we know. But I think this one is unprecedented in many ways. In Bayer, we've been following over the recent past. We've given ourselves a vision of health for all and hunger for none, guided by our purpose of using science for a better life. But COVID-19 sort of like has reminded us of, well, and has made us go back and say, so what are we doing and how are we responding to crisis? And I think first, for us as a healthcare company, never before has our purpose rung so true than in these times where health for all is what we're all striving for. And it obviously this crisis also presents some type of opportunity for us because it has opened a window of I think, new quality of multilateral collaboration across industry. And when I say across industry, we all know each other as competitors. We come together in industry associations. But this is also an opportunity to come together at a completely different level. And when you see the amount of energy that has gone following COVID-19 outbreak, that has gone into research and development and into really coming together to beat this thing. It's I think also unprecedented before. The same holds true in our interaction with policymakers. Policymakers typically are someone that you go and interact with to inform them about your point of view. Now this time, this sort of like we have inverted roles. Policymakers came to see us and asked us for help. Policymakers came and improved and did speed up some regulations that typically would slow us down. This time it was the opposite. I was in situations where I had to push my people to say, no, we can do this. Regulators are allowing us to go this fast. So we're doing all of this and trying to find a solution to that. I think what we're seeing is there is an unprecedented amount of ability to adapt to a situation like this. Never before would we have thought that we could operate outside of our offices. Never before did we think that we could communicate to customers and other stakeholders only through digital means. Never before have we seen such an energy to do voluntary work. I can tell you, we repurposed, for example, our labs to do testing in Germany and increased national capacity for testing by a significant amount. And we helped a government in purchasing effort of masks. We helped come together through government intervention and private intervention to ship drugs faster to where they were needed the most. And I could give you hundreds of examples. At the same time, in all of this, we can't turn our eye off the ball that the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations remain a guiding post for us. And in our case, we influence quite a number of them. Let me, because I think it's
maybe we'll hold on that and come back to it if we can when we go through the discussion. Fabulous. Thank you so much. And Stefan, I think you bring up two really good points that Julie, I would like to go deeper in with you. And one is this point of adaptability and transformation, right? We are in the greatest transformation we've ever been in from many different communities, the climate community, the gender community, et cetera. We were always told that transformation is too difficult. Behavioral change is too difficult. You're never going to get there. And yet in the last few months, we've seen that not only have people transformed, but their good innate side has come out, solidarity, shifting, trying to do the right things. What does that mean for you, Julie? I mean, EY has obviously been doing so much work and you've been leading in the gender space. Are you seeing the good sides and people realizing the importance of women's roles, both in the economy, but also in terms of the many things that you've been calling for?
Sandrine, I would love to paint a really happy picture and say, yes, everybody recognizes that role and believes in the SDGs as we do, especially in this panel and on this call. But I have to say, in the thick of things, in the middle of the crisis, people have been trying to set priorities. And I do have the feeling that the SDGs are falling a little bit by the wayside. I think it's our job to bring them front and center and ensure that policymakers are really focused on this and businesses focused on this. Sandrine, I have no desire to go back to the old reality. And if I could call that maybe pre-Christmas time. While I thought economically we were all doing really well, I have to say there are some things that I don't appreciate. I don't appreciate the gender pay gap. I don't appreciate the level of women in leadership roles. I don't appreciate the level of women in STEM and technology. And I certainly don't appreciate that women are carrying the bulk of this crisis on their backs as healthcare workers, as those that are working in the informal economy, as entrepreneurs that have received little to no support on the back of this crisis. And so I think I want to put the SDGs in the front. I think at EY, we're doing that by embracing a purpose and a strategy that drives long-term value. And I think we as society have a huge opportunity on the back of this crisis to recreate a new normal, Sandrine, a new world for us that actually allows us to accelerate, exactly to your point, as every industrial nation and every large corporation is accelerated in technology. Why can we not together accelerate in the SDGs? And that's where I think we've got to give an impulse both to business and to government policy, exactly as Stefan has said. How do we get there? And I think it's possible. I really think it's possible.
So, Julie, I think that you bring up I mean, we do need to remember that many of us see the silver lining in COVID, and others have really had an incredibly difficult time. And the ones that have suffered the most have been the most vulnerable, as well as women, because we see that it's also African-American communities, mostly migrants across the globe, who have really suffered. And clearly, we are all as vulnerable as the weakest link in our civilization, right? And we need to think about that. And that comes back to the SDGs. That was the essence and the crux of why the SDGs were created, because we realized that we needed to have a much more equitable and holistic system. So coming back to that, and coming to you, Rachel, thinking a little bit about what then are the solutions, because I'm entrenched here just outside of Brussels. And yesterday, another woman leader, President von der Leyen, announced the economic recovery and listened. She listened to so many voices that said, we cannot go back to business as usual. We need to bounce forward. We need to create and co-create a more social and environmental Europe. And that needs to be the backbone of whatever recovery policy we have. So in some ways, you're right. Not everyone's listening to the SDGs. Some are. How can we get a more unified force, realizing that this is actually the backbone to a resilient recovery? Rachel, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, so it's about doubling down on the SDGs, not about, taking a pause while we try to recover. I think it's as true in the developed world as it is in the developing world. In the developed world, we had a health crisis, which produced an economic shock, which is producing a financial crisis. In the developing world, they've had a financial crisis as everybody pulled their money back, as the developed world experienced the health crisis, moving then into an economic crisis, and now the health crisis is beginning to bite. And to see, how the virus pans out across every corner of the world. But the need for resilience is very clear within the inequality of the developed world, and then between the world and within the developing world. So let's just take energy as one example. You can't run a successful health system without access to affordable energy. So we've been kind of futzing around at the fact that this needs to be an urgent priority, and very little money flowing into it from countries' own GDP, very little development. Health systems and energy systems not playing well together. But if you can break all of that down and say, okay, in order to be able to be resilient to this crisis and the next crisis, which is a climate crisis, which is a respiratory crisis, which is a health crisis, we will need to have functional, affordable, accessible health systems. Then for not a lot of money, you can actually stand that up and be more resourceful. So the question now is not, oh, goodness me, we're seeing lots of off-grid, distributed, solar, wind, renewable, microgrid, companies going to the wall in the developing world and in the developed world. In Massachusetts, 17,000 jobs have been lost in the renewable energy sector alone in the last 6 weeks, right? Rather than saying, okay, this is a question mark over renewable energy, it's like, no, this is actually where tax should be going. This is we should be printing money if you can in order to be able to sustain it. This is where aid should be going. This is actually the front line. That in renewable energy business, those are good quality local jobs. They will make economies stronger. And so now we double down on the SDGs. And if you want to measure it in SDG terms, that's 7, it's 2, it's 5, it's 6, it's 3, it's 13 and 17. But so I think we just need to remember and leave no one behind. And we need that cleaner, greener, safer, fairer economy. That what we knew before the crisis still holds true today. And now we have to have the leadership to actually go do it. It's not expensive. It's cheaper.
You're so well, and also, right, I think part of what you're saying as well, Rachel, is let's get rid of the perversities in the market. We're always talking about new capital, right? But if we were able to eliminate subsidies full stop already, we could have some of that capital necessary to immediately dispatch where it needs to go. It's the way in which we've set up our markets, which have made it difficult. And now with the cost curves going so much in favor of renewables, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But coming to the ecosystem that you just described, which I think is exactly what the SDGs are all about, which is that our health system is dependent on our energy system, is dependent on our water system. Stefan, I know that at Bayer, you've been looking at a variety of those interrelationships, obviously. And again, in the way in which we were discussing this earlier and yesterday, it seems that you're trying hard in your conversations with governments to bring up a much more systems approach in the way in which they're thinking post-COVID.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are so many aspects to this. We've been sitting together at the highest level of our company over the past 12 months, and have really taken to heart how we can bring not just the sustainability goals into our actions, but also into our wallets, quite frankly. So my compensation is now linked to sustainability goals within the company. But we've also, as one of the largest companies in the area of nutrition, we are cognizant of the fact that we need to act within the boundaries of the planet, and that is really important. And for us, that will mean that we will have to come up with solutions, and we will make science work in a way, for example, that we use less pesticides in the future. We need science work in a way that we prevent people from trying to get more land and create more arable land, because that will create problems, more problems that we can't afford. And so I think this is something that we're part and parcel of in the way we work. On the healthcare side of things, we try to bridge more inequalities that we see, for example, by giving access to medicines in countries where the level of affordability is different than we would see in the developed world. We do this through tiered pricing and reimbursement systems. We also do this. You may know, we were one of the co-inventors of the pill early on, and today still a leading company in terms of contraception. So we've set ourselves a goal that we want to give 100 million women in low and middle income countries access to long-acting contraception. So not just a helicopter and some pills, but really enable women to manage their family planning, especially in countries where that is, societally speaking, really difficult, and to really have an impact. And this is again where the multilateral approach comes in, with governments, but also with non-for-profit organizations like with Gates or others that are working along those same goals. And I really see that there's a push to that, and I think it gets, again, like through a focal glass in the COVID crisis. There is more willingness right now, and I hope we can preserve this as we come out of this to actually work together, because there is a renewed sense of not just purpose but also trust. So the people that before were seeing each other not necessarily eye to eye now see that they have to rely on each other to come through this, and I hope that some of that trust remains as we come out of it.
So it's really interesting that you should bring that up, because most of the trust barometers that we're starting to see is a real shift actually back to some governments, not all, whereas governments were way down, policymakers were way down on the list, as were businesses. And now there also has been an increase in the trust of businesses. So I think you're right, stepping out of COVID, we need to show the responsibility that has been taken. You also bring up a really good point around access, which also Rachel mentioned. And there is a real fear that the most vulnerable will not have access to the vaccine, will not have access to what they need as we start to look at crisis management and chaos management. And Julie, I guess from an EY perspective, have you started to see some of this as well? And are you getting a real sense in the work that you're doing that people still feel that they're really on the front line, as you were talking about some of the negatives, and will be as they come out of the crisis?
Yeah, I think some of the points that you're making, Sandrine, are really critical here. We definitely see the need for businesses also to reinforce that trust concept that you mentioned, working to ensure that they are addressing not only shareholders, but a wider group of stakeholder value, and making sure that actually stakeholder value in itself links largely to the SDGs, looking for how they are delivering on financial value, social value, value for their clients, and value for their people. And when you start to break that down, that can, with concrete goals, that really can help ensure that businesses are responding in the right way. Now, do we see them doing that yet? Sandrine, I think we're right at the tipping point. This is where we have a real chance to make some active choices on behalf of business, to the point, things like Stefan is mentioning, of how he and Bayer are working together to translate SDG goals to real financial goals. We need other companies to follow suit, adapting their strategies to make sure they're actually capitalizing on that and driving further growth for the benefit of all as we do that. Now, that does mean that we need to act, Sandrine, for those that are most vulnerable, coming to your second point, and that includes the women. And so it does mean that companies are going to have to think of, are they really going to cut the most vulnerable from their workforce as they reduce jobs and employment? Are they going to cut the women first? What are they doing to ensure that they are eventually reskilled and eligible for some of those jobs? How many jobs will they be replacing with technology where we could have made sure that we've had somebody sustainable to work, for example, in an emerging market? And I think some of those are the choices that are going to have to be made on behalf of business and government to get the right answer. The good news is I actually think there's quite a way to combine the benefits of both worlds. In other words, there is absolutely no conflict between good, healthy financial growth and sustainable goals. And that's what we've got to get in the public's mind, is that actually each and every one of us makes a choice every day with the products we purchase, the suppliers we use, the officials we elect, in terms of what we're asking for. And it is possible to bring those goals together.
Okay, so fabulous response. And thank you so much, Julie, for that.